What's up, everybody? Welcome to the PickSix podcast, CBS Sports Daily NFL podcast. I'm Will Brinson. I'm your host. It is Wednesday, August 25th. This is Fantasy Week in the feed right now. A DFS breakdown with Frank Stanfill. On this episode, we are dragging our good friend Josh Norris back onto the podcast to talk some best ball and more specifically Underdog. This way I don't have to harass Josh and his DMs about how much I love Underdog. And this is not, by the way, if you use promo code, if you go to underdog.com, draftunderdog.com, or you just download the Underdog app and use promo code CBS, you get a free $25 in bonus cash with your first deposit, which means that you can play in Best Ball Mania 2. I feel like I'm at least ahead of the curve here, Josh, in being, I'm a second tier adopter. I am a self-proclaimed second tier adopter, but I feel like I'm at least ahead of the curve before Best Ball and Underdog take off.
Let's also say, Will, that my appearance on the show is not an ad placement. I'm here because of our friendship and because we like to talk football and those types of things. I will say, though, if you are not playing best ball out there, it's football Pringles. Like, once you draft once, you cannot stop.
That's a perfect.
And I'm biased. I would say Underdog is the best platform for that, but it is so good even to prepare for that season-long league that you care about most, because you can get like the 102 slot one time and the next time have the 111. And if you want to, start running back, or start wide receiver, you can test out all those constructions as well. And since in best ball, there are no waivers, there's no trades. You don't have to worry about setting your lineup each week based on matchups, because we set your optimal lineup for you after all the points are scored. It truly is the best way to figure out the optimal strategy that you want for your draft. And I'm so glad that you've started to love it too, Will.
Yeah, and I mean, the goal here, we sort of did this last year with the DFS podcast where we said we tried to, and we did it again, as I mentioned. There's a sort of like basically a DraftKings chat with Frank Stanfill in the feed. But last year it felt like we were kind of giving our audience something new. Lots of people play DraftKings, but now it is extremely mainstream. It feels like after the last year, maybe the last 2 years, and then I don't think that Underdog is a thing that has completely moved past sort of the. I don't want to.
No, we're in phase one of this, Will, because
okay. So I'm not wrong. I'm not crazy.
No, and it's such a new thing where, one, for Underdog, when they have 1 year of data, that there's still discussions on like roster construction. Like, should you take 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, 10 wide receivers, 11 wide receivers, so on and so forth. This is all still new and raw, that like no one is really wrong. No one is really right yet. And we're still trying to figure out like the best way to approach all that. And I think that's what makes it so much fun.
Okay. Yeah. In fact, I was out, I think it was like last Friday, and was talking to two friends of mine who are big sports junkies. It's like, do you guys do best ball? They're like, no, what are you talking about? So for those people who don't know, as Josh points out, what you do is you go into a 12-person draft, just your average draft, 12 person. I think you can do probably 3 or 10 or whatever you want to do. You draft a team. It can be comprised of whatever you want. In theory, you have to have. You don't have to have it. Do you have to have anything?
Yeah, there are limits on certain positions. There are limits on certain positions.
Okay, so you do have to have a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide.
The starting lineup is 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and 1 flex.
Yes,
that's it. And there are 18 rounds.
Yes.
There's no defense. There's no kicker. That's
and then what happens is, on a weekly basis, you score points just like regular fantasy, except, as Josh had pointed out, you don't set your lineup at all. If you have, let's say you have 6 wide receivers and you have 3 wide receiver slots, just ignore the flex for a second. The 3 highest wide receiver scores of your 6 guys will be applied to your team.
Right. So if like Marquez Valdez-Scantling has his week on Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football of his 50-yard touchdown that we all attach to his name, if you're playing regular season-long managed leagues and you didn't have him in your lineup, my, oh my, that is frustrating, because that might have won you that week. But guess what? That's why those players, the MVSs, the KJ Hamlers, the Deshaun Jacksons, people in the past have thought Will Fuller was this. These are types that we love. As Hayden Winks, my co-host, puts, better in best ball. And so having those types at the end of your roster, and also ones week to week that you can count on as production, that's why the roster construction comes in, and it's so tricky and so much fun to diagnose different ways of doing it too.
Okay, so before we get into the strategy of that, I'm curious about contest selection because I think that this is key, and I'm worried that I'm not doing a good job of it because I'm only entering these gigantic. So the 3 contests that Underdog have right now are the the puppy, and it's the puppy 3 because you already filled the first 2.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. I mean, I think we put out the original puppy. I'm just going to open up the curtains and open up the door so you can see behind the scenes here. Will, the first puppy, I think, was only about like 50,000 entrants, and that filled in 11 days.
I got 3 entrants into that one before it got filled. I was like, whoa! I was
and the max you can put in is 150 entries. That's $5, by the way. So if you use promo code CBS, you get $25 for free. Skip the guacamole, put that into Underdog, and you get 5 free entries here into the puppy 3. And if you win the puppy 3, you get $200,000, $100,000 a second place, $60,000 a third. Anyways, we've gotten to the puppy 3 now because again, puppy 2 finished also Will in 11 days. And now this one is at 220 entrants as well, but it only opened, I think, 2 weeks ago.
Yes. I mean, I've drafted 20 puppy 3 teams.
Love it.
In a week. Yeah. And I think I got 8 into the puppy 2. Best Ball Mania 2 is also out there because Best Ball Mania, but that's the sequel to last year's Best Ball Mania.
Correct. This is the largest single season fantasy prize of all time. So
$1 million for first place.
Correct. It's a $3.5 million prize pool. We opened it 2 days after the NFL draft was over. Yeah, $1 million and $1 to first place, $250 to second. Best Ball Mania 2 last year, Will, first place only got $200,000. So my friend Justin Herzig, second place gets more than them this year. Anyways, 175, 100. So don't just think you have to win first place. You can go and win second, third, and fourth as well. And that's $25 to enter.
Yes. And then the big dog, which is $250 to enter, I believe is.
I will not ask any questions on your entrance in this one, Will.
I don't mind. I mean, I've entered a couple times.
I love it.
I find it. I mean, yeah. Anyway, I've entered a couple times. It is $100K to first. And it's a 20-round draft, so 2 extra rounds. That actually saved my bacon last night when I was drafting, or 2 nights ago when I was drafting one. I was about to be screwed on the tight end position, and only 2,300 people joined that one. So, and if anybody's played DraftKings, if you've done any sort of DFS, you know that the smaller the player pool, the easier it is to win. Like a lower score is going to win the big dog than more than likely than whoever wins Best Ball Mania 2. And you can't import a lineup into this. You do a live draft. I mean, all your teams will be different more or less.
Right. And there's some calendar differences here too. I mentioned when Best Ball Mania 2 opened, that was like May 3rd, right? And so some of those teams had Cam Akers as a first round selection.
For sure.
Some of those teams obviously had Travis Etienne. Now, that also means you're going to battle against teams that drafted like Darrell Henderson in round 11, Marquez Callaway in round 18. So it's going to be fascinating to find out where the winning team was selected, if it was early in the process or right now when we do have more information. Now, if that not necessarily scared you, but begrudges you from taking, and competing against players for the entire summer, then go and try out the puppy, because the puppy is so new and recent and just about 2 weeks old that might be the right platform for you. And there's also one-offs. Like if you and your buddies just want to try a draft, there's also private drafts, which I forwarded this video over to Will. So you go and there's a $3 one, there's a $5 one, there's 12-person, there's 6-person as well. Will, you need to try out the 3-person, 6-person drafts at some time. Anyways, you can get a link and just send it to your buddies and just go through a draft just to get feelers out there on how the drafts fall right now.
All right. So contest selection. If let's say that you are going to spend $100, 125, because you deposit 100 and you get your free 25 using promo code CBS. I mean, hey, that's fine. How would you, Josh, divvy up your interest? And I guess I'm asking this: do you think that it is necessarily similar from a payout perspective so like when you do DraftKings, a lot of people, I think the majority of smart people believe that you should play enough cash where in theory you can pay off your tournament entries or something along those lines. I don't do that. I just like playing the GPPs. It's probably stupid, but I'm a stupid person. And I figured that enough, if I can hit enough, then it'll balance itself out. How does that sort of, what approach do you think is the best way to do it on Underdog?
Yeah, I mean, I want to expose your sum to Best Ball Mania 2. So with that extra $25 that you get, I would put one entry into Best Ball Mania 2, but I would wait until the last second to do it. So I would let this third week of preseason happen, see if there are any more injuries, see if we know Mac Jones is the starter, see if we know Jameis Winston is the starter, Trey Lance, so on and so forth. So I have all the information possible, because then I think that might be the best competition against the people who drafted in May and got some ADP differences.
Agree with that.
Now, that would also leave me 20 entries into the Puppy 3. And that's what I would do as well. So I would do 20 entries and then one entry in Best Ball Mania 2.
Okay, so the approach to put into these big tournaments is perfectly fine. Like, you don't need to be doing a bunch of little 12-man leagues and trying to win those. Is that okay?
Because if you win your league in the Puppy 3, because how this works, how the tournament works is, it cuts it off at a certain week point so you can start playoffs, but it's the winner and second place get to advance. And if there's any overlay, if there's not enough filled, then that's when they start taking wild cards. So maybe some third place, high scoring third place teams.
Right.
So you still have a chance of winning your league in the Puppy and basically returning on the same thing. That would be like the same thing as cash games, as like these one-off single entries.
So if you win your league and you advance to the playoffs in the Puppy, you're going to get paid.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, in other words, like, I haven't looked at what the payouts for the smaller leagues are, but it makes a lot of sense to just do these bigger tournaments, and you're hoping that you win your league or finish in second place anyway. I mean, we're not here playing for $25, right? You're playing for the $1 million. I mean, that's why we're doing this. All right. So with that in mind, and I think that's how I would probably appropriate it too. The fast, I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, I guess I had, but in Best Ball Media 2, you're competing against a bunch of hashtag sharps who were drafting in May. And I was late to the party in this, but some of these guys have great value. On the other hand, like I saw Josh from at Josh ADHD. He like tweeted out his Scott Fishbowl team, and it was like his, Cam Akers and Travis Etienne were two of his first 4 picks. I mean, it's over, it's done.
Right. There has been, again, we're learning so much about this. It's odd. The wide receivers, there was like a 2-week period in there. You might have missed this, Will. All got pushed up.
There was in the middle of that.
Yeah, there were points in June where maybe only one wide receiver was being selected in round 1, and that was probably Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. So like 10 running backs were going in round 1. Now, that would also, at the time, have allowed you to get like an Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams stack pretty easily if you had wanted it. Now, there's at least 3 wide receivers going in round 1, at least in Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, whatever order, plus Travis Kelce. I've also seen, I'm sure you have, Calvin Ridley, maybe DeAndre Hopkins get taken at like the 112, 2-1 turn quite often, because
I've seen Ridley go before 12. I mean,
right. And so people want these wide receiver starts. So think this is ever evolving. And Will, I also think we forgot how different last off season was during this period.
With no preseason. It's wild.
Preseason was ripped away from us. Think about, and this is timely, think about how different last year's fantasy season would have been if we had just seen James Robinson run with the starting lineup for 2 games when he went as a last round pick in a lot of your home leagues, your managed leagues, or undrafted completely. And then he goes and becomes the running back 7 overall in fantasy points per game. Your entire fantasy landscape would have changed. And so we're getting all of that. We're maybe overreacting in some situations.
We are thirsty in these streets, Josh. We are overreacting like crazy, and that's fine. But it's like 20% more overreaction than it would normally be, I think, or something in that range. I mean, so I was drafting on Monday night some best ball teams, and Marquez Callaway is going off. I mean, he's catching 2 deep bombs from Jameis Winston. And I was telling Frank Stanfield this yesterday. His ADP went from it was like listed on the thing. It's like 150, and he's going 120 or like 110. I was trying to grab him, and he'd already been taken in any draft I've done. Jameis is going a little bit earlier. We saw
likes of Terrace Marshall are going much earlier. I was touting him at like wide receiver 72. He's all the way up at wide receiver 58 now.
Jerry Jeudy, who's had a good preseason, is shot up into the 5th and the 4th round in now, and he was going in the
Rondale Moore, wide receiver 54.
Yeah.
You mentioned Marcus Callaway, wide receiver 59 as well. It's so funny, Will, because there are certain players I've been touting this summer, and this shows you how little influence I have, even though I work for the damn company. Damian Harris is still going as running back 21, despite what I've been trying to say all summer long. And there are some other players, and Will, maybe this is the edge. Everyone's searching for an edge. Maybe this is one. We just talked about a bunch of rookies and people who change teams climbing because of their performances. Curtis Samuel has not changed at all because we haven't seen a lick of him, and he's dropping at wide receiver.
I've been snagging some Curtis Samuel the last couple.
Wide receiver 49. Will Fuller is a player that we haven't seen a second of, and he's going as wide receiver 42. Okay, and so maybe these players who are in great situations but have not like been able to put a performance out there, even in practice, to show like, oh, let's salivate over this, this, and this. Maybe that's the edge, and those are the guys that can drastically overperform by 5, 10, 15 wide receiver spots later on.
I like that idea. Okay, so I want to get to specific players in a minute after the break, but I am curious, exposure wise, what so one of the cool things about this is not an Underdog ad, but the app is awesome. I mean, I sit on my couch at night and I watch whatever show's on, and I do I'll usually get a puppy draft and a best ball mania draft going, and I'll go through there. It is incredibly native. You can open up you can upload your own rankings. I'm not, you can't find Underdog ranking and Underdog specific rankings many places. I use established runs. Evan Silva and Adam Levitan, they do kind of good work.
I don't know who those guys are.
Yeah, I never heard of them, right? Brick by brick, Josh. I guess Rosenthal is brick by brick, right? But so you can upload your own rankings, and that can give you an edge too, because it's currently sorted by ADP when you draft. And so you can create your own rankings too. And the key there is that if I have 37% Travis Kelce, because I take Travis Kelce in the first round anywhere outside of the 3rd spot right now, because I'm going to take more Kamara, I think, because I think the Jameis Winston situation helps him. Dalvin, I sort of begrudgingly take it too, and Christian McCaffrey's at 1. But anywhere else, I'm just going to take Travis Kelce. What would be your what do you think is a good exposure number to cap, or do you even cap it?
Oh, that's so tough, Will, because I think everyone has their guys, right? And talking about edges, last year, a lot of it probably would have been rookies because that was a total unknown and no one knew anything. Not to, throw myself under the bus here, but last offseason I was talking more about Henry Ruggs and Jalen Reagor and not enough about Justin Jefferson and Chase Claypool, and so
nobody knew.
Right. And so these things happen. I don't know if I would ever go more than 30% on one player or 33% on one player, unless Will, unless you get to certain parts of the draft,
yes,
where it's just okay, we're beyond round 12 or round 10, and that's where when Hayden and I were reviewing these winning teams from last year, the draft is really 12 rounds long, and then in rounds 13 through 18, you'd be very, very lucky to get 2 to 3 usable weeks of any wide receiver or running back, and really the best thing to target in that area is your quarterback 2 or your quarterback 3, okay? But it's also those quote-unquote better and best ball types, the MVSs, the KJ Hamlers, that can hopefully give you super spiked weeks that put up 12.
You mean my 62% of Rashad Perryman?
Yeah, no, that's another one of those names that can totally work. I guess my point is this: if we get into that running back area, which is called the running back dead zone, of the Trey Sermon, Chase Edmonds, Javonte Williams, Kareem Hunt, and if you have one of those guys at 40% and not a little bit more flat exposure among other ones, because we know that the hit rate on that area can be lower.
Sure.
And if you only plant your flag on one and he misses, then a lot of those teams are just going to be dead. You know what I'm saying? So it's
for sure.
The exposure is different in different areas of the draft for sure.
If Trace for the record, I have an obscene amount of Trey Sermon,
As you should.
And I don't have a problem with that. And if Hayden, your colleague Hayden Winks, doesn't stop tweeting out the 49ers playoff schedule and video and gifts of Trey Sermon, I'm going to kill him. Like, stop it. I just take him in the 6th round every time because he's not making it past the 6th round. Like,
right.
You never see him go to the 7th round. So, all right. So, and again,
who are your highest exposure players? Do you mind sharing?
Rashad Perryman.
Why? Give us a little reasoning. Give us a little taste.
All right. So Perryman is dirt cheap. He's in that 15th or later round. He is a guy who's just going to, first of all, it's TJ Hawkinson, Rashad Perryman, Tyrell Williams, and Quintez Cephas on Detroit. Right. They have to throw the ball some. And, they are going to get some, you're going to get some matchups that are against good pass defenses. And Rashad Perryman, to me, is the quintessential going to catch a bomb or two and probably have mostly lame weeks. But if you give him enough targets, and Jared Goff is a quarterback who
he's a quarterback.
He's a human being with legs and an arm. And that Lions offensive line is actually not that bad. So
no, I agree.
So basically I'm looking for Perryman deep bombs. Trey Sermon, who I am planting my flag on Trey Sermon, and I'm definitely. I mean, I've bet Trey Sermon to lead the league in rushing and bet him to.
I love that.
Win Rookie of the Year at 100-1 and 28-1 respectively. So
I mean, look, we haven't seen Raheem Mostert for a second in the preseason, but what we think of like the player archetype of Raheem Mostert is, and I think the reason why they're saving him is he's the most explosive back in the NFL. And that might seem like a crazy statement, but when we check his miles per hour and we check his highlights, it's absolutely factual. So I think that they realize that they don't have anyone else on their team that can fill that kind of a role. Meanwhile, and as cliche as it sounds, Will, I think you're going to really have like a thunder and lightning approach. I agree. Trey Sermon for 15 to 17, sometimes 19 touches when a team. I mean, we've seen it with Kyle Shanahan against the Packers a few years ago, where Raheem Mostert ran for like 220 yards and 3 touchdowns. Because if they can't stop it, they're just going to keep running it. And the history of the Shanahan family tree, they never invest in the running back.
He's the highest invested running back in the history of the Shanahan tree, right?
And it's not just a third rounder; it's 2 third rounders because they traded up to get him. Did they draft Clinton Portis and then, they drafted Champ Bailey and traded for Clinton Portis, right? Correct.
So I mean, they didn't invest, in a high round pick and Clinton. Right.
Correct.
So the highest invested running back in 2 generations of the Shanahan family. They added Alex Mack in the offseason. They brought back Trent Williams. They are a run heavy team. And if Trey Lance is in there, it's going to open up the run game as well. This is, to me, and if you watch Trey Sermon play at Ohio State, this is a one-cut, explosive zone runner. I mean, he is a archetype for the Kyle Shanahan offense. So I'm all in on him.
And not to take this interview over, but Will, is he often like your running back too? Like, are you leading with like an anchor running back? I know you probably want to talk about maybe this kind of draft strategy later on.
No. You're not taking an interview over. This is a conversation.
Because that is kind of a difficult area. Like, if I can bring up where he's going, it's in an area where we love a lot of those wide receivers. So you probably have either gone Travis Kelce, like you mentioned, to start, maybe a running back in round 2.
Here, I'll tell you exactly what I did.
Yeah, I would love to hear this.
In this big dog draft last night. So a high stakes draft. I went Travis Kelce at 5th overall. Actually, I back up what I say I do. Then I went AJ Brown at 20th, Robert Woods at 29. And then I know that it's unpopular to take these dead zone running backs, but Miles Sanders to me is undervalued for how he looks.
Interesting.
So I went Miles Sanders, and
so he's your running back 3 is basically what you're saying with Trey Sermon sometimes.
No, Miles Sanders is 1.
Oh, okay.
Then I grabbed I missed Chris Godwin in there. So I picked up 3 wide receivers and Travis Kelce, and then I grabbed Sanders. What am I missing there? Shouldn't there be then I grabbed Sanders, Trey Sermon, Kareem Hunt.
Okay.
So I'm living in the running back dead zone.
You are. Now, like, big picture, if we can zoom out from that, you have your 3 wide receivers, you have your tight end. So that's your starting lineup each week at those positions. And then there's this phrase that we started using that you need to win your flex a lot of times, because that can be like the big differentiator. And so then going 3 straight running backs, that means your third running back and those other wide receivers that you're going to draft afterwards are like competing for your flex spot. Just to quickly throw out, like, I mean, I personally love Mike Davis. I personally love Damian Harris, but there's so many great wide receivers going in that range that can sometimes feel dirty to take a running back instead of them. Deebo Samuel is one. Devonta Smith, I think, because he missed so much camp, like that has dropped. I think Hayden and I are 10 wide receiver spots ahead of ADP and where Devonta Smith is going. Mike Williams could have a massive year. Michael Gallup, so on and so forth. But you're also going to find yourself, and I'm sure you have in drafts, Will, where wide receivers just fly off the board at the top. Like, I mean, 20 names in the top 3 rounds easily.
Oh, for sure. Well, and that's, Josh, that too, to me, is like, when you do these roster construction on these drafts, is you're also, the Mike Tyson line applies, right? Like, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. You can go into this draft. First of all, you don't know your draft spot until 60 seconds before the draft starts.
Right.
You have to be prepared to draft from everywhere. And when I can go in and get Travis Kelce, and then Saquon Barkley falls to me.
Right.
Or Jonathan Taylor, or, whoever else. And I'm like, okay, I was going to take a wide receiver, but the big guys I like, Ridley's gone, et cetera, et cetera. Like, so I'm going to go with Saquon Barkley. And then at that point, it changes how your entire draft goes. So I don't really have necessarily I don't have a concrete, I have a general strategy that I go into it with, where I'm going to take either Kelce or one of the 3 stud wide receivers.
Okay, here's my question. How early are you taking Travis Kelce? Because you're not getting the 105, 106 every single time.
No, I mean, I'll take him. No, that's what I said. Like I said earlier, I'll take him anywhere from 104 down. Okay. And usually he won't make it to me, but I found that if Kelce, here's my thing. If Kelce doesn't make it to me, then I can get one of Diggs, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill. And if all those guys are gone, then I'm going to have an opportunity to grab
2 running backs.
Yeah, Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, et cetera. And so it's almost, that's how I sort of build out my strategy when I'm drafting. Is those are my 4 key guys.
Dare I say that, like, the 103 is the most difficult spot that you're in, because you're most likely going to miss out on Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook. Correct. And you have to make that decision between Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, and I'll throw in Ezekiel Elliott's name in there at the 3 spot. And then once you get, like you're saying, to the 4 area, 5, 6, you can have that conversation of Kelce, Tyreek, Devontae Adams, and Stephon Diggs. And I really like taking that approach of taking, like, such a difference maker pass catcher, and then coming back in round 2 and getting Jonathan Taylor or getting Najee Harris. I came into this preseason
not wanting to like Najee Harris, and now it's like, I kind of love him. Yeah.
I'm like, okay, he's going to get the opportunity. Maybe we're just stupid nerds who've too much focused on, like, Big Ben's arm and offensive line, and maybe the Steelers are actually right, and this is going to be okay because he's going to get 350 touches this year, and that is so bankable. And I think as long as health happens, like, CEH has a path to, like, a top 7 season. So again, getting those top, 3 or 4 pass catchers, and then following it up with a running back in round 2, and sometimes even Joe Mixon falls, Austin Eckler, that would be my ideal strategy of the wide receiver, tight end, and then running back star.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of treat it like, and this is, people will make fun of me because I'm, jamming in a musical reference that I like to jam in every show, but it's sort of like a jam band where I know what notes I'm going to start playing with. Like, those 4 guys, like, there's 4 or 5, I'm targeting these core guys, but then I'm going to let how the draft goes dictate my strategy from there on out. And it's also, if you're drafting these puppy drafts, you're spending $5. I mean, it's don't get me wrong, it's $5. Like, you're trying to win a bunch of money, but you can afford to take some chances and be a little contrarian, and you already have exposure on other guys in different places.
Yep. And I also want to point to Justin Herzig's team last year, who won Best Ball Mania. He had 2 dead zone running backs. Will he took Alvin Kamara at the start, and that ultimately won him because that was Alvin Kamara's monster final week game that won him the 2.
You had to have him to win the title.
But he was the only one that advanced to the finals that had Alvin Kamara.
Wow.
So this is another thing to look for if you're going to enter these big tournaments. Not necessarily look at that final week schedule. Look at the weeks ahead of it, because a lot of those players are going to have the same, like, Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry were on a lot of those teams that advanced, but when they had a small final week, they didn't have a chance of winning the whole thing. So if you look at like week 14, week 15, instead of just, week 17, that might be one way of, having differences in the lineups as well. But what I was going to say is he had Alvin Kamara, I believe he had Chris Carson, and he had David Montgomery. So like we live in this football bubble right now, and a lot of people are trying to figure out, again, what the best construction is and, take 0 running backs, fade that spot because it's super fragile, so on and so forth. All you need is one team to hit. It's 18 picks. If you get it right, there's not one right answer. You can have, 3 running backs through 5 rounds. You can have 3 running backs through 12 rounds. There's so many different ways of doing it that I wouldn't focus too much on just one way and let it fall to you, like you're saying.
I agree. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, a couple more players and how important is stacking. Okay, so as I was telling you before we started the podcast, Josh, I was really excited about this. In fact, I was like scribbling notes down. I was like, I got to make sure I ask Norris about this tomorrow. But I came out of the same draft where I had the 2, Sanders, Sermon, Kareem Hunt, Michael Carter, the running backs, and then I had AJ Brown and Robert Woods, as I mentioned, who I took, right around or ahead of their ADP. And I started looking at it, and as sort of the draft was unfolding, I realized that I could potentially get Matthew Stafford and Ryan Tannehill to pair with my top 2 receivers. And anybody who's played any DFS or fantasy knows that if you might not win with it, but you sure as heck increase your upside by adding the pass thrower to the pass catcher. So every time Robert Woods or AJ Brown catch a touchdown, I will be getting 2 touchdowns worth. It sort of seems obvious, I think, but just to clarify, stacking is kind of paramount here, right?
In tournaments, it makes more sense because, again, we just talked about it like on those weeks that you need to advance in week 15, week 16, week 17. You're hoping for a Matthew Stafford game. You're hoping for the Titans. We just talked about, during the playoff run, what San Francisco's schedule is going to be like. I also, on the other hand, though, Will, think there is like a major detriment in those tournaments if you had reached by like a round or 2 to get your stack, because there's going to be other teams that had those quarterbacks fall to them perfectly, right? That, or even found value in those stacks as well. It's so tough. A lot of people say, well, the only way I'm going to get Patrick Mahomes is if I draft, Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill, but then you're spending like a 4th round pick on Patrick Mahomes, sometimes a 3rd round pick. I would like to get your thoughts on this. What do you think about not stacking necessarily your number 1 wide receiver or your number 1 tight end or your number 2 wide receiver? Like, let's say instead you get like Mike Williams as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, and then you pair him with Justin Herbert. Because, Will, I keep looking at these drafts, and this is good advice for people out there just in their managed leagues too. I mean, again, we love those top 5 quarterbacks that range from Patrick Mahomes to Dak Prescott. I can see Russell Wilson having a quarterback 1 overall season this year. We saw what Justin Herbert did last year. I mean, even in that top tier, there's a 30 pick difference between where Patrick Mahomes is going and Dak Prescott is going, right?
Yeah.
But then there's that like sweet spot, I think, of quarterbacks right now. I absolutely love Matthew Stafford as quarterback 13. I mean, that feels so good. And like, if you get a Calvin Ridley early on, if you get a Kyle Pitts early on, Matt Ryan as quarterback 18 makes sense. And then, as you know, you can keep going. You can do 2 stacks like you talked about with Curtis Samuel, who I'm hyping up. Logan Thomas is going as like the tight end 9 overall. You get Ryan Fitzpatrick. If
you want to do Curtis Samuel, Logan Thomas, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, it's there for you.
Correct. And that's so much easier to achieve than a Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman, Patrick Mahomes stack, right?
Oh, absolutely. I would say that 90% of the time that I do those stacks with the mid-range, the 3rd tier mid-range quarterbacks, I don't even really mess around with like Dak stacks, or I drafted Josh Allen with a Stephon Diggs roster, but I had to reach for Allen by 10 spots on his ADP. And, ultimately that hurts your team because you are, you're giving up a player at 40th overall that you might be, and maybe Josh Allen falls to me, maybe he doesn't, so I agree with you. I think if you're going to stack, you need to stack in a way that is like in line with the ADP or valued.
Correct.
If you're reaching just a stack, I think it's a detriment to your roster.
And typically, and every team is different, but if we look at like the league as a whole, wide receiver quarterback connection is the strongest. I think actually tight end running back connection is the least strong, but like that, who cares? But it's different. It's different. Like a Lamar Jackson to like one of his pass catchers certainly is not the same as a Russell Wilson and DK Metcalf connection, right?
Oh, of course not. Yeah. Like I had an instance at some point in the last week where I was close to the turn, and I had drafted only running backs and wide receivers. And I was on the turn. I was on the 12 spot, and as it pops up, Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews were both available. That to me is a very natural pairing.
Correct.
Because their ADP is very nearby. You can grab them and put them together. And then later on, I wasn't even looking for it, but I came up and it was like, and Marquise Brown was available. And at that point, it was like, oh, well, he's just falling because he's hurt. Nobody wants to draft him because he's, and
Will, you might have noticed this maybe in some of your big dogs. At some point, people like focus so much on stacking that they won't even look at quarterbacks that they don't have an affiliated wide receiver or tight end to. So then, like, I don't know, Justin Herbert will just fall to you if you're the one that took Keenan Allen early on, or if you're the one that had Austin Eckler on your
correct.
team.
And if you
room of 12 drafters is so different. I can't stress that enough. It's so different.
It's crazy. You just don't know how things are going to play out. And to your point too, like in a $5 draft, you're a lot less likely to see people focus on stacking,
right,
than you would in like a $250 draft, because people are just, it's a turn that gets hammered and hammered and hammered. Any other strategy thoughts you have? I don't want to say in general, because I hate asking in general questions, but when, or are there players you're avoiding? Are there players, like how early do you want to take a tight end? I usually go Kelsey or push it back. Yep. And then we'll maybe look at Hawkinson. And if that doesn't happen, then I'll grab a Logan Thomas. I think Logan Thomas and Noah Fant is sort of my floor for where I want my tight end one to be.
For sure. I would say when looking at tight ends, a lot of people just care about snaps played. Part of it is where those snaps are played. And this seems like a small detail, but it's really important because slot snaps are great. Slot snaps, like for Logan Thomas, for Noah Fant, that means they're not going to be left in as blockers. If your guy's blocking in the offensive line, if he's playing in the offensive line sucks, he could be blocking in those passing snaps. So like that's where Adam Troutman was. I'm a little bit sour on Cole Kmet because he's such a vital piece of like the inline role for them.
Yeah.
That's how we could have identified the Darren Wallers last year, the Logan Thomases, the Noah Fant, so on and so forth.
Kittle may be the exception just because of how that offense runs and he floods out of there. But
the number one rule though, when I'm drafting, is you have to take 4 wide receivers by the end of round 7. I really think that is important because that position is so talented and it matters so much for just the strength of your team as it goes along. Now, you'll see drafts that like people have 6 wide receivers before round 7. But I think that there is a drop off, especially with some of these rookies and some of these players that we haven't seen, that like if you do cap it with a Mike Williams at the end, then that allows you to avoid like the uncertainty of, I don't know, like Elijah Moore or a Rashad Bateman at one point, who I still like. Like I still want to draft a lot of those, but I don't want to force them into my starting lineups each week or have them be based on how I drafted.
So
and that's part. Have you drafted any teams that didn't?
Yes, I actually did one last night.
Okay, I want to hear this.
Yeah, I just brought it up. So I was in the 9th spot, and Kelsey fell to me at 9. I'm going to take Kelsey at 9 all day, every day. I have no problem with that. All the wide receivers have been gobbled up, and that's why Kelsey fell. And then Ridley and I think AJ Brown and DK Metcalf went. So I grabbed Jonathan Taylor at 16. That meant that my first wide receiver was going to be 33rd overall. And I don't feel comfortable with it. And essentially what happened is I took, and of course I jammed Trey Sermon in there as well, but 4 of my next 5 picks were wide receivers.
Whenever I hear something negative during the season about Trey Sermon, I'm absolutely thinking about you.
I mean, if Trey Sermon has a bad year, if Trey Sermon gets hurt tomorrow, I'm like shutting down my life. So essentially what happened, so 4 of my next 5 picks were wide receivers at that point. And basically what ended up happening, Josh, is my starting wide receivers, and frankly, I'm not comfortable with this, are Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, Mecole Hardman, and Mike Williams. This team's probably not winning much. Now,
so my question to you, again, you have to start 3 wide receivers each week. How comfortable are you right now with a wide receiver in Mecole Hardman, who we don't even know can play the position, as your wide receiver 3 in your team? You know what I mean?
I'm not comfortable at all. I mean, Mike Williams, who I got, I think 12 picks after his ADP. And then I actually added Curtis Samuel, about 10 picks after his ADP. Devontae Parker, 20 picks after his ADP. Gabriel Davis, 20 picks after his ADP. I don't know why. And I threw in Brashad Perryman. At that point, I was sort of thinking, okay, I want guys who are being undervalued at wide receiver, because Devontae Parker's had a 1,000-yard season. Curtis Samuel is beloved by Scott Turner and by Ron Rivera. There's a very good, and as you point out, he's undervalued. And then Gabe Davis and Brashad Perryman are high upside guys.
Right.
So the goal there was sort of, all right, this is a team where a lot has to hit for it to be, the floor is very low. Maybe the ceiling is high if these guys all brother-in-law it, but I didn't feel.
But you're drafting as if you're right too.
I was glad it was a puppy.
Yeah, you're drafting as if you're right too, because if you're drafting Mecole Hardman, even where he's going right now, then you're banking on him having a legit season, not just fizzle out. I think that's part of it too, and I'm sure you've talked about this concept. Draft as if you're correct. Don't necessarily hedge on your picks once you've made one, because then you can just another puppy right after it.
You know what happened in this draft? I didn't scroll all the way up. I forgot. So it wasn't even 4 of my next 5. I have Mahomes in this league too.
Mm-hmm.
So I took Kelsey and Taylor, and then Mahomes ended up falling past his ADP.
Right.
And I was like, all right, screw it. Like, we're going for a stack here. Then I'm going to take Mecole Hardman because, Tyreek Hill's already gone. At that point, I'm like, maybe the Chiefs are good. I don't know. Maybe if the Chiefs offense is good and Mecole Hardman's a vital part, then that team has upside. That was sort of the thinking there, and like I said, I don't expect to look at this team and be like, oh, that team dominated at the end of the year, right. But it definitely has it has a pathway to get there.
And I would also throw out, people talk a lot about construction now. Again, there are 18 rounds, so you could potentially do it like 3, 4, 8, 3 if you want to stagger it that way, or 2, 5, 8, 3, or like move one of those tight ends over to a wide receiver, so on and so forth. Don't just say like, oh, I got to my 9 wide receivers because I finished the draft with 4 straight wide receivers. Again, think of it as just 12 rounds and make sure like that is your team that can fill in all the starting spots. And then again, I would think of your quarterback 2, your quarterback 3 super later on, who can hopefully give you some spiked weeks there. Yeah. Those spiked week other players at wide receiver and tight end and running back insurance, Will. Like people who come from those typical season-long.
Travis Etienne owners would like a word. Cam Akers owners would like a word.
It is such a different mindset, I think, with running back insurance in this versus season-long, because in season-long you have to use waivers. Like you don't want one of those Alexander Madisons just taking up a roster spot for you each week, and you're like, I got to pick up a starting wide receiver, a starting tight end, and a starting quarterback. You don't have to do that here. So like having your Alexander Madisons, your Darrington Evans, your Chuba Hubbards, I would even throw in Devontae Booker early on the season.
Yeah.
Those are totally solid picks to me and potentially league winning types if it hits. Now, I would also say if you take Dalvin Cook, don't take Alexander Madison, because then you're not spreading your roots big enough. You want exposure to 2 different ones. So if you do have Ezekiel Elliott, maybe that's then the type to take Alexander Madison, because once again, you're drafting as if you're correct. And if Dalvin Cook goes down for 2, 5, 7 weeks, you have a starting running back on a bankable rushing attack who's supremely talented as well. And so also, now you have.
If Dalvin Cook goes down and he's your number 2 pick, you're probably not winning anyway. So like, yeah, exactly.
Correct. But the running back insurance in those like 13 round plus areas, I think are a great way to cap your running back room at like running back 4, running back 5 as well.
And the other thing too is that people are not interested in those running backs in these drafts.
Correct.
Like I have 43% Tevin Coleman. because nobody wants Tevin Coleman. And I don't blame him. Is Tevin
Yeah.
Coleman sexy? Hell no. He's not that interesting. But this is a guy that, for whatever reason, Shanahan lineage has been obsessed with for several years. Mike LaFleur is a Shanahan protege. And while Michael Carter looks explosive and awesome, he is a rookie and injuries happen. Tevin Coleman could end up getting, 10, 15, 20 carries for a 5-week stretch for the Jets, who I think will probably be better on offense than people think.
Look, Jeric McKinnon is going as running back 60 right now, and people love to take him because they're still hanging on to it in this bubble that we live in. But if Joe Mixon goes down, all indications are like Samaje Perine's going to get a massive rushing workload.
Sure.
He's going back as running back 73. Again, I mentioned Devontae Booker because he's one of the last on this list. He's running back 68. Darrington Evans, if Derrick Henry goes down, which he never has, but if he does, the identity of that team is drastically going to change. And
Yes.
Darrington Evans comes in there and he immediately plays a massive role. And getting that at running back 59, again, could be a clear difference in your team, making it very, very long in one of these tournaments.
And, and I'm saying this as someone who has stacked Ryan Tannehill and AJ Brown a bunch in the last, few weeks, but, and hasn't added Darrington Evans, but that's probably a good, ancillary piece to add on the back end if you have AJ Brown, if you have Ryan Tannehill, because then they're not going to be this power run team.
Those late stacks can sometimes pay off. Like if you went and got Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert, you missed out on Mike Williams. Maybe finish it off with a Josh Palmer in round 17 or 18. I would throw out, we talk about running back insurance. I think Van Jefferson is awesome wide receiver insurance. Ooh. Because if Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp go down, he is going to be a wide receiver in 2 receiver sets out there, and it's going to play a massive role, and you can get him as wide receiver 17, 18. And also say, Will, think of where everyone has just tremendous groupthink and dip your toe a bit into the unknown. This was very easy to do in May and June with the New York Jets because only one of those players was going in the top 100, and it was Michael Carter. You were getting Corey Davis as their wide receiver 3, basically, at that time. Zach Wilson around quarterback 28. I cannot believe I'm making this case, but there is
the Jets offense is going to be good.
There is a first round wide receiver that we just saw go in May and April, Will, who's going as wide receiver 99 right now. This is a very long season that we have. And I understand that I am not trying to promote Kadarius Toney, say it was a good selection, but at some point in 17 weeks, don't you think that the New York Giants are just going to try to get some manufactured touches to Kadarius Toney? To me, he's a great round 18 pick right now because if he gives you 1, 2, 3 weeks, that's it. That's all that you need.
Second only to maybe Jerry Jones and making sure that his guys get propped up is Dave Gettleman. You think Dave Gettleman isn't invested in making sure that ownership knows that Kadarius Toney can be an effective player on the field, or that Daniel, so I don't hate it. What was I going to ask you? Oh, what do you think about AJ Dillon?
He's in that area. So he's going as running back 33 right now. Let's talk about that group. It's Raheem Mostert as running back 30, Michael Carter as running back 31. Look, I love Aaron Jones. James Robinson was going as running back 32. I'm not sure how much you're going to promote him. I have him all the way up to running back 17 now because I think he's going to crush. He's going to crush.
I'm a little worried about Carlos Hyde.
I think it's going to be 70-30 at worst.
I think that's
going to be 70-30 at worst. But AJ Dillon, you get that running back insurance where if something happens to Aaron Jones, then boom, you have that on a great offense. But also, I think his role is just expanding, even though they gave the extension to AJ Dillon. So what? You're able to get him. I'm trying to look
Aaron
at
Jones
where
the extension,
yeah. AJ Dillon is going around 94 overall. So it's in that wide receiver group where you can poke holes in it. It's Mecole Hardman.
Yeah.
It's Darnell Mooney, who I love, but Jarvis Landry, Jalen Waddle. So if you want to take, I would say probably your running back 3 in that area in AJ Dillon, it does make sense because again, ceiling play is massive there for him as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's sort of what I've been trying to do with that. I have a lot of Jameis Winston. I think he's gonna be very good. Naheem Hines and probably underrated, but I'm biased there. Terry McLaurin feels like a guy that you can get. I've been drafting a little bit of is Jalen Guyton.
Okay. I mean, that can be one of your late round guys. I'm going to throw out one too.
I have to search for him. He's not even in the rankings. Like, you have to search like guy and then like draft Jalen Guyton. I mean, that's.
I am not a fan of his Twitter feed, but
I don't follow him on Twitter.
The more Cole Beasley tweets, the more I want to draft him.
I thought you were saying Jalen Guyton was
no.
That's a good point on Beasley. The only concern, I'm not going to reiterate the concern about maybe missing games, but that is a concern. But
I think it's all baked in. Will where he's going.
That's a good point. I mean, you could get you can get if you're and maybe you have to reach a little bit to get Allen. But you could potentially put together a very cost-effective Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Cole Beasley, Josh Allen stack and just unlock the Bills.
So I do not believe that Gabe Davis, if everything like goes the way that the Bills want it to, is going to play as many snaps as Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley. So I dug into this a couple months ago, and the ADPs have changed since then. But when Gabe Davis stepped in the starting lineup last year, like in those final 7 weeks, I think, plus playoffs, including playoffs, he had a catch rate of 35%.
Not great.
Okay? And there were some playoff games which is where the Bills want to be. They want to win the damn thing now. He had a 0% catch rate in some of those. And as soon as John Brown came back in, boom, take Gabriel Davis out. Then you go and a lot of people can point that out. But then I think you and I will, and where some people separate themselves, is you go back and watch too, and it lines up. He's a very straight line player. He doesn't move laterally very well. I think they view him, and they're probably going to be second in the league in 4 wide receiver sets, but I think they want him to be their 4th wide receiver.
And they just take deep shots with him.
Exactly. And so he was going well ahead of Emmanuel Sanders, who's now going as wide receiver 62. Wow. Cole Beasley is on the freaking board, Will, until wide receiver 65. And while I keep bringing up that better and best ball of the deep shot types, I think that also makes us overlook the types like Cole Beasley
or Jarvis Landry.
Who can put up sustained weeks of 5 receptions, 50 yards, a score, 6 catches, 72 yards, 4 catches, 42 yards, and another touchdown. He had those weeks last season. And so if he plays, he will absolutely crush wide receiver 65 ADP.
Okay. All right. I could ask you a billion more questions about Underdog, but I won't. We're not. You've got a lot of work to do. I got a lot of work to do. I got to go draft much more.
I love this. Well, what you have done is insert some players that I haven't really been thinking about as ones to play. I will say this. I'm going to make one more pitch for Damian Harris. Okay.
Pitch away. I love Damian Harris.
Running back 29. So that's the end of that dead zone area. They're going to be top 5 in carries this year. Well, they were top 3 in rushing attempts last season.
Second in carries behind the Ravens.
Right.
Yeah.
Behind a top 5 offensive line. And I've thought Mac is going to start all along. And if that's the case, the battering ram near the goal line is done. I think people have this warped sense of, I hate in my managed leagues to have to worry about who's going to get the touches each and every week.
Sure.
We've also heard from Phil Perry, Mike Reese, all these people that Damian Harris, Bill Belichick himself, Damian Harris is the guy. Now that might only mean 12 to 17 touches each and every week. He's going to get the Sony Michel treatment though. And this is such a different offense from 2019 when they were near the highest in neutral pass rate in the NFL. It's going to be much closer to what the Browns ran last year. I want the leading, rushing attempts leader on the team. Again, it's going to be among the highest in the NFL behind a great offensive line with Mac Jones at quarterback. And Damian Harris right now, I wouldn't be surprised, if he finishes as a top 20 running back this season. Again, you're getting the running back 29.
Do you think that they're showcasing Sony Michel? Frank Stanfield had floated this. Do you think they're showcasing? Because Sony kind of looked explosive and he looked a lot better than I thought he would in the preseason. But are they trying to pump him up to get him to trade him? Or I don't know if you can get something for him in a trade.
Possibly. And, I also whenever I say something about Damian Harris, I'm like, well, Ramondre Stevenson's going to get the job. Look, if you go back and look at what Bill Belichick has done in recent years of like Shane Vereen, Damian Harris, a few other names,
he literally redshirted Damian Harris. He didn't like let they
redshirt their guys unless it's like Lawrence Maroney and Sony Michel and first round draft capital attached to a guy. And look, I understand James White in passing game, sure, but yeah, maybe that happens with Sony. I'm just so comfortable that like Damian is going to get the first crack in an extended run at that unless he gets injured or unless he fails, that's when it's going to get stripped away. And I just want to bank on this offense that people remember last year. Everything that they've done this offseason is to indicate how different they want to be from last year. I'm buying Mac at like in terms of offensive rookie of the year futures.
Ooh,
like when he is the 5th quarterback and it goes to a quarterback, love that very much. They're going to be multiple. They're going to be quick when they want to be with 2 tight end sets. They can be versatile. And it extends. This might be dangerous, but hey, maybe I'm a Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels believer. Imagine that. But like
I'm the Patriots to win the Super Bowl future.
Where like Nelson Aguilar is going and Jacoby Myers is going, because if you're going to run a ton of 12 personnel, you're going to have 2 wide receivers stuck in the field, and that's them. I have a lot of exposure to the Patriots this year, and I feel comfortable with it. I do.
Yeah, and you have to understand that it's not going to be as like they're not going to be a high flying, greatest show on turf, but that offensive line is nasty, and they're going to minimize. They're going to make the throws easy. They're going to get guys open, and they're going to pound the ball. That's what they're going to be. All right. Josh Norris at Josh Norris. You can go to use the is it draft underdog? I don't even use the website. I use the website
underdogfantasy.com.
Underdogfantasy.com. I just type like UND in my computer and
just
then
download the app.
Yeah, download the app. If you can you upload rankings on the app? I don't think so, right?
No, you have to do it through the website.
So if you want to do customized rankings, but you can do it. You can do it in a second. If you want to upload customized rankings at underdogfantasy.com, and if you go to the app, you can fire up a draft within you could be drafting a team in the puppy because those things fill like crazy. Like I was up at 11:30 last night. I entered a puppy and it's just like draft starts in 60 seconds. Let's go. I mean, but your Pringles comparison is so true.
Yeah.
Like I got done with the draft. I was like, well, maybe like one more before. It's like a cocktail. Like I was like, maybe one more cocktail before bed.
Love it. Well, love it. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, bud.
No. Thanks for doing it a second time and for enjoying this during this Underdog Fantasy commercial, buddy. I'm kidding. Thanks, Josh.
See you, man.